Released in 2003, Underworld introduced audiences to a stylish new supernatural action franchise centered around an ancient war between vampires and werewolves, known in the film as lichens. While its dark visual style and gothic atmosphere became defining features, much of the movie's success rested on the performances of its cast. The actors brought credibility, intensity, and emotional depth to a story that could easily have become nothing more than an effects-driven action film. Instead, their performances helped establish memorable characters that continued to shape the franchise for years to come. At the center of the film is Kate Beckinsale as Selene, the elite vampire warrior known as a death dealer. Before Underworld, Beckinsale had already established herself as a talented actress with a diverse career. She appeared in literary adaptations such as Much Ado About Nothing, Emma, and Cold Comfort Farm, earning praise for her elegance and dramatic ability. She later reached mainstream audiences through films like Pearl Harbor in 2001 and Serendipity the same year. Those roles presented her as either a romantic lead or a dramatic actress, making Underworld a dramatic shift in her career. Playing Selene required intense physical preparation, weapons training, martial arts practice, and stunt work unlike anything she had previously attempted. Beckinsale transformed Selene into one of the most recognizable female action heroes of the early 21st century. Rather than portraying the character as overly emotional or invincible, she balanced strength with restraint. Selene rarely wastes words, relying instead on controlled expressions, body language, and determination. This quiet confidence became one of the character's defining traits. Her performance proved that female-led action films could succeed while maintaining intelligence and emotional complexity. Following Underworld, Beckinsale became strongly associated with action cinema, returning in multiple sequels while also appearing in films such as Van Helsing, Whiteout, Total Recall, and Contraband. Even decades later, Selene remains the role most audiences immediately associate with her career. Opposite Beckinsale is Scott Speedman as Michael Corvin, an ordinary medical student whose life changes forever after becoming entangled in the conflict between vampires and lichens. Before Underworld, Speedman was best known for television audiences through the popular drama series Felicity, where he gained recognition for his natural screen presence and relatable personality. His casting served an important narrative purpose. Michael functions as the audience's gateway into the hidden supernatural world, so he needed to appear believable, vulnerable, and sympathetic. Throughout the film, Speedman portrays Michael's gradual transformation from an unsuspecting civilian into someone caught between two ancient species. His reactions ground the increasingly fantastical events, giving viewers an emotional connection amid the elaborate mythology. While Underworld significantly increased his international recognition, Speedman continued balancing film and television work rather than becoming exclusively associated with blockbuster action roles. Nevertheless, Michael Corvin remains one of the defining characters of his career and became essential to the franchise's evolving mythology. Michael Sheen delivers one of the film's most energetic performances as Lucian, the charismatic leader of the lichens. By the time Underworld was released, Sheen had already built an impressive reputation in theatre and British cinema. He was respected for his versatility and his ability to portray emotionally layered characters. Instead of presenting Lucian as a simple villain, Sheen infused him with intelligence, sorrow, determination, and quiet humanity. Lucian believes he is fighting for freedom rather than conquest, making him far more compelling than a traditional monster antagonist. Sheen's performance introduced moral ambiguity into the story. As the film progresses, viewers discover that the history taught by the vampire elders is incomplete, and Lucian's motivations become increasingly understandable. His ability to balance menace with compassion elevated the character beyond standard action movie villains. Following Underworld, Michael Sheen's career flourished even further. He became widely recognized for portraying real-life figures such as Tony Blair, David Frost, and Brian Clough, while also appearing in major fantasy franchises including Twilight, Tron, Legacy, Good Omens, and Masters of Sex. His role as Lucian demonstrated his remarkable ability to humanize complex antagonists. Bill Nighy portrays Viktor, one of the oldest and most powerful vampire elders. Although Nighy had enjoyed a lengthy acting career in British theatre, television, and film, Underworld introduced many international audiences to his commanding screen presence. Viktor represents centuries of authority, tradition, and hidden corruption. Nighy plays him with calm confidence, measured speech, and an intimidating sense of superiority. Rather than relying on loud displays of anger, he projects quiet menace through subtle facial expressions and carefully controlled dialogue. When Underworld premiered in 2003, it entered a period when supernatural films were experiencing renewed popularity, but it distinguished itself by presenting vampires and werewolves in a completely different way. Rather than embracing gothic romance, traditional horror, or campy monster action, the film combined supernatural mythology with modern action cinema, martial arts, gunplay, and a dark science fiction aesthetic. This unique combination helped redefine how audiences viewed classic monsters during the early 21st century. Although critics were divided upon its release, audiences embraced its stylish world, allowing the film to develop a loyal fan base that would continue supporting the franchise for decades. One of the film's greatest cultural contributions was its reinvention of vampires. For generations, vampires had often been portrayed as aristocratic figures living in isolated castles, wearing elegant clothing, and relying primarily on seduction or supernatural abilities. Underworld retained their sophistication but modernized every other aspect. These vampires lived in hidden urban societies, operated advanced technology, carried automatic weapons, and fought organized military campaigns. They resembled secret agents as much as mythical creatures. This fresh interpretation influenced how many later films, television series, comic books, and video games portrayed vampires as disciplined warriors instead of merely supernatural predators. The Lycans underwent a similar transformation. Earlier werewolf films often focused on uncontrollable curses, tragic loneliness, or horror rooted in transformation itself. Underworld instead presented Lycans as an organized resistance movement with leaders, soldiers, laboratories, intelligence networks, and long-term strategic planning. Rather than mindless beasts, they became intelligent revolutionaries fighting against centuries of oppression. This reinterpretation added political complexity to the traditional vampire versus werewolf conflict and encouraged audiences to sympathize with both sides instead of automatically supporting one species over the other. The film also arrived during a period when action cinema was heavily influenced by The Matrix, released only 4 years earlier. Slow-motion photography, stylized gun battles, leather costumes, acrobatic combat, and blue-tinted cinematography had become increasingly popular. Underworld successfully adapted these visual trends into a supernatural setting without simply copying them. The result was a recognizable style that blended gothic horror with futuristic action. This visual identity became one of the franchise's defining characteristics and inspired numerous productions that attempted similar combinations of fantasy and modern combat. Another significant aspect of Underworld's cultural impact was its contribution to female action heroes. Although cinema had already featured iconic women such as Ellen Ripley from Alien and Sarah Connor from Terminator, female-led action franchises remained relatively uncommon. Selene joined this select group while introducing a different type of heroine. She was not portrayed as comic relief, a romantic side character, or someone needing rescue. Instead, she served as the story's primary warrior, investigator, and emotional center. Selene's popularity demonstrated that audiences were eager for intelligent female protagonists capable of carrying large-scale action films. Kate Beckinsale's portrayal emphasized professionalism, discipline, and emotional restraint rather than exaggerated toughness. Her performance influenced discussions surrounding women in action cinema and contributed to the growing acceptance of female-led blockbuster franchises throughout the following decade. Many viewers, particularly younger audiences, viewed Selene as an empowering figure who challenged traditional gender expectations without sacrificing emotional complexity. Fashion represented another area where Underworld left a lasting impression. Selene's long black leather coat, fitted tactical clothing, silver weapons, and minimalist appearance became instantly recognizable. Halloween costumes, fan conventions, cosplay events, and promotional artwork frequently featured variations of her distinctive outfit. The combination of Gothic elegance and military practicality created one of the most memorable visual identities in modern fantasy cinema. Similar costume designs later appeared across numerous films, television series, comics, and video games that sought to evoke a similarly dark and stylish atmosphere. The film also strengthened interest in Gothic aesthetics during the early 2000s. Dark clothing, industrial music, leather fashion, blue lighting, and urban Gothic imagery experienced renewed visibility among fans of fantasy and horror. While Underworld did not create these trends independently, it became one of the era's most recognizable mainstream representations of Gothic culture. Fans appreciated that the film treated its supernatural world seriously rather than presenting it as parody or exaggerated horror. Within online communities, Underworld became a frequent topic of discussion regarding the fictional rivalry between vampires and werewolves. Fans debated which species possessed superior abilities, military tactics, leadership, and mythology. Internet forums during the early 2000s regularly hosted lengthy conversations analyzing the strengths of Death Dealers versus Lycan Warriors, Viktor versus Lucian, and Vampire Society versus Lycan Rebellion. These debates helped maintain interest in the franchise between sequels and encouraged deeper engagement with its fictional universe. As internet culture evolved, scenes and images from Underworld also found new life through memes and social media. Selene's emotionless facial expressions, dramatic action poses, and stylish appearance were often used humorously to represent confidence, determination, or emotional detachment. Quotes from Viktor and Lucian occasionally resurfaced in fan communities discussing leadership, betrayal, or hidden truths. Although the film never became a major source of mainstream internet memes, it maintained consistent visibility among fantasy enthusiasts and genre audiences. The movie also contributed to broader conversations about prejudice and historical revisionism. The creation of Underworld was the result of an ambitious effort to combine Gothic horror, science fiction, and modern action into a single cinematic experience. Released in 2003, the film was directed by Len Wiseman, who was making his feature film directing debut. Although he had previously worked on commercials and music videos, Underworld represented his first opportunity to direct a major motion picture. The project required him to balance world-building, visual effects, practical action sequences, and emotional storytelling while introducing audiences to an entirely original mythology. The success of the film established Wiseman as a filmmaker capable of handling visually complex action productions and launched a franchise that would continue for years. The original concept centered on the idea of an ancient secret war between vampires and werewolves taking place beneath the surface of modern society. Rather than presenting these creatures in medieval castles or isolated forests, the filmmakers imagined them living in contemporary cities, using advanced technology, firearms, and military tactics. This approach immediately separated Underworld from earlier monster films. Wiseman wanted audiences to believe that these supernatural beings had quietly existed alongside humanity for centuries without being discovered. Kevin Grievous, who appears in the film as the powerful Lycan warrior Reyes, played a major role in developing the original story. Before acting in the movie, Grievous had already written extensive background material explaining the history of the vampire and Lycan conflict. His ideas formed the foundation of the franchise's mythology, including the bloodlines, political structures, and ancient rivalries that became central to the series. This deep backstory allowed the filmmakers to create a world that felt much larger than what audiences actually saw on screen. Danny McBride later expanded these ideas into the screenplay. One of the script's greatest strengths was that it treated the supernatural conflict with complete seriousness. The characters spoke about centuries of history, betrayal, and political power as though these events were real historical conflicts. This grounded approach helped audiences accept even the film's most fantastical elements. Casting Kate Beckinsale as Selene proved to be one of the production's most important decisions. At the time, Beckinsale was primarily known for dramatic and romantic performances rather than action films. Some questioned whether she could convincingly portray a highly trained vampire warrior. To prepare, she underwent months of physical training that included martial arts, weapons handling, fitness conditioning, and stunt rehearsals. The filmmakers wanted every movement to appear efficient and disciplined rather than exaggerated. Much of Beckinsale's performance involved performing her own physical work whenever possible. Although professional stunt performers handled the most dangerous sequences, she completed many action scenes herself. This decision allowed the camera to remain focused on her face during combat, increasing the realism of the fights. Learning to move naturally while wearing the character's tight leather costume added another layer of difficulty, as the outfit restricted movement more than ordinary clothing. The famous black leather costume itself became one of the production's greatest challenges. While visually striking, it was uncomfortable to wear during long shooting days. The material trapped heat beneath the studio lights, making physically demanding scenes exhausting for the actors. Despite these difficulties, the costume became one of the most recognizable outfits in modern fantasy cinema and helped define Selene's iconic appearance. Michael Sheen approached Lucian differently than a traditional movie villain. Rather than emphasizing anger or brutality, he focused on Lucian's intelligence, pain, and determination. Sheen believed the audience needed to understand why the Lycans continued fighting after centuries of oppression. His performance deliberately suggested that Lucian viewed himself not as an evil conqueror but as a revolutionary leader seeking justice. This nuanced interpretation gave emotional weight to the conflict and made the story morally complex. Bill Nighy developed Viktor's personality through restraint rather than explosive emotion. Instead of portraying an obviously cruel ruler, he played Viktor as calm, confident, and absolutely convinced of his own righteousness. His measured speaking style and subtle facial expressions created an intimidating presence without requiring excessive displays of violence. Wiseman encouraged Nighy to project authority through silence and posture, allowing Viktor's confidence to dominate every scene. One of the film's defining visual characteristics is its distinctive blue color palette. Cinematographer Tony Pierce-Roberts worked closely with Wiseman to create a world that felt permanently trapped between night and dawn. Blue filters, cold lighting, and carefully controlled color grading gave the movie its instantly recognizable appearance. Warm colors were intentionally minimized to reinforce the emotional distance between characters and emphasize the coldness of vampire society. The production team wanted the environments themselves to feel ancient despite existing within modern cities. Gothic architecture, abandoned industrial buildings, underground tunnels, cathedrals, and historic mansions were combined with contemporary technology to create a timeless atmosphere. The result suggested that centuries of hidden history existed beneath ordinary urban life. Many scenes were filmed in Budapest, Hungary. The city's historic architecture provided the perfect backdrop for the film's Gothic atmosphere, while also offering practical advantages for production costs. Budapest's narrow streets, stone buildings, underground passageways, and old churches naturally complemented the story's dark visual style. Instead of constructing enormous studio sets, the filmmakers frequently enhanced existing locations with production design and visual effects. Several interiors were modified extensively to create the Vampire Coven headquarters. Massive halls, stone walls, towering columns, and elaborate staircases gave the impression of an aristocratic civilization that had survived for centuries in secret. At its core, Underworld tells the story of an ancient war between two immortal species, vampires and Lycans, that has lasted for centuries in secret while humanity remains completely unaware of its existence. Although the film is filled with action sequences, supernatural mythology, and elaborate visual effects, its narrative is driven by mystery, betrayal, forbidden love, and the gradual discovery that history is not always as truthful as those in power claim it to be. The film unfolds like a detective story wrapped inside an action thriller, with each revelation forcing both the audience and the protagonist to question everything they previously believed. The story begins by immediately immersing viewers in its hidden world. Instead of explaining the mythology through lengthy exposition, the film opens with Selene, a death dealer, narrating the endless conflict between vampires and Lycans. She explains that for generations, the vampires have hunted the Lycans, believing them responsible for the murder of their families and the destruction of vampire society. This introduction efficiently establishes the central conflict while allowing the audience to experience the world through Selene's perspective. Selene is introduced not simply as a vampire, but as one of the elite warriors responsible for tracking and eliminating Lycans. She is highly disciplined, emotionally reserved, and completely loyal to her vampire coven. From the beginning, viewers understand that she has dedicated her entire immortal existence to this mission. Her identity is built around duty, obedience, and revenge. She has never questioned the history she was taught because she completely trusts the vampire elders who raised her after her own family was murdered centuries earlier. The first major plot development occurs during a surveillance mission in a subway station. Selene notices that a group of lichens appears to be following an ordinary human named Michael Corvin. Initially, this seems like another routine operation. However, something feels unusual. The lichens are not attempting to kill Michael immediately. Instead, they appear determined to capture him alive. This unexpected behavior raises Selene's suspicions and introduces the film's central mystery. Why would the lichens risk exposing themselves for a seemingly insignificant human? This question becomes the driving force of the first act. Rather than reporting her observations and allowing others to investigate, Selene decides to pursue the matter herself. This decision represents the first sign that she is beginning to think independently rather than blindly following orders. Although she still believes the vampires are unquestionably the heroes, her instincts tell her that something larger is unfolding beneath the surface. As Selene continues investigating, Michael repeatedly escapes danger through luck and her intervention. He remains completely unaware of the supernatural conflict surrounding him. Because the audience experiences much of the story through Michael's confusion, they gradually learn about vampire society alongside him. This narrative technique prevents the complex mythology from becoming overwhelming, allowing information to be introduced naturally as Michael uncovers hidden truths. The tension increases when Lucian, believed by the vampires to have died centuries earlier, is revealed to be alive. This revelation completely changes the stakes of the story. Lucian is no ordinary lichen. He is the legendary leader of the rebellion, the individual responsible for organizing the lichens into a disciplined military force. His survival means that the history accepted by vampire society may not be entirely accurate. Selene cannot understand why such an important fact has remained hidden. As Michael becomes the target of increasingly dangerous attacks, Selene decides to protect him despite orders from her superiors. This decision creates the film's first major turning point. By choosing Michael over absolute obedience, Selene unknowingly places herself on a collision course with her own leadership. Her emotional connection to Michael grows gradually, not through sudden romance, but through shared danger and mutual trust. Unlike many action films, their relationship develops naturally as they rely on one another to survive. Meanwhile, the film carefully expands its mythology through conversations, flashbacks, and political intrigue within vampire society. Viewers learn that the vampire elders operate according to a strict hierarchy. Viktor, Marcus, and Amelia rule through an alternating cycle of hibernation, with only one elder remaining awake at a time to govern the coven. This unusual system immediately suggests that power within vampire society is carefully controlled, while also creating opportunities for secrets to remain hidden for centuries. Craven emerges as one of the story's most important secondary antagonists. Publicly, he presents himself as a loyal vampire noble preparing to become Viktor's successor. Privately, however, he has formed a secret alliance with Lucian. At first, audiences believe Craven may simply be a cowardly politician attempting to preserve his own position. As the story unfolds, however, his deception proves far more significant. His lies become the bridge connecting both sides of the conflict. The narrative reaches another major turning point when Michael is bitten by Lucian during a confrontation. This moment fundamentally changes the direction of the story. Michael is no longer simply an innocent bystander. He now carries lichen blood within him, beginning a transformation that neither side fully understands. Instead of remaining a passive character, Michael becomes central to the future of both species. As Selene continues investigating, she discovers evidence suggesting that Lucian's motives differ dramatically from what she has always believed. Rather than seeking the complete destruction of vampires, Lucian appears focused on Michael for a very specific biological reason. Michael descends from an ancient bloodline connected to Alexander Corvinus, the first immortal ancestor from whom both vampires and lichens ultimately originated. Lucian believes Michael's unique genetics may allow the creation of a powerful hybrid capable of ending centuries of division. Although Underworld is often remembered for its stylish action sequences, gothic atmosphere, and supernatural battles, the film contains a surprisingly rich collection of themes that give emotional depth to its story. Beneath the gunfights, vampire mythology, and werewolf transformations lies a narrative about identity, prejudice, corruption, forbidden love, revenge, and the search for truth. These themes elevate the film beyond a straightforward action movie, encouraging audiences to reflect on the consequences of hatred passed down through generations. The symbolism woven throughout the film reinforces these ideas, making the world of Underworld feel emotionally and philosophically layered despite its fantasy setting. One of the film's strongest themes is the danger of inherited hatred. The conflict between vampires and lycans has lasted for centuries, but very few characters truly understand how the war began. Instead, both sides have inherited stories told by previous generations. They fight because they were taught to fight, not because they personally experienced the events that started the conflict. This mirrors many real-world conflicts where hostility continues long after the original causes have been forgotten or deliberately distorted. Selene represents someone raised entirely within this cycle of inherited hatred. From the moment she became a vampire, she accepted that lycans were monsters responsible for murdering innocent vampires, including her own family. She never questioned this belief because everyone around her repeated the same version of history. Her transformation throughout the film is not simply physical or emotional, it is intellectual. She learns that truth cannot always be found in official histories or those who hold power. This journey from unquestioning loyalty to independent thought forms the emotional heart of the story. Closely connected to this is the theme of truth versus propaganda. Throughout the film, the vampire elders carefully control historical information. Viktor presents himself as a noble protector of vampire society, while Lucian is remembered only as a savage criminal responsible for endless violence. As Selene uncovers hidden memories and forgotten events, she realizes that history has been deliberately rewritten to justify Viktor's actions. The audience learns that those in authority often shape historical narratives to preserve their own power. This idea gives Underworld surprising political depth. The film suggests that history is rarely simple and that official versions of events should always be questioned. Every society creates heroes and villains, but the truth is often far more complicated than either side admits. By the end of the story, viewers understand that neither vampires nor lycans are completely innocent. Instead, both have become prisoners of a conflict sustained through misinformation and revenge. Identity is another major theme explored throughout the movie. Selene begins the story believing she fully understands who she is. She sees herself as a loyal death dealer, protector of vampire civilization, and servant of Viktor. However, every revelation forces her to reconsider her identity. If Viktor murdered her family, if Lucian was telling the truth, and if the vampires themselves created much of the conflict, then everything she believed about herself becomes uncertain. Michael experiences an even more literal identity crisis. At first, he is simply an ordinary medical student living an ordinary life. Without warning, he becomes the focus of an ancient war he never knew existed. After being bitten and eventually transformed into a hybrid, Michael no longer belongs completely to either humans, vampires, or lycans. He becomes something entirely new. His transformation symbolizes the possibility of transcending inherited divisions and creating a future beyond traditional categories. The hybrid itself functions as one of the film's strongest symbols. For centuries, vampires and lycans viewed one another as mortal enemies whose bloodlines could never coexist peacefully. Michael's existence proves that these rigid divisions are artificial. His body literally unites opposing species into something stronger than either one alone. Symbolically, he represents hope that reconciliation is possible even after generations of conflict. Forbidden love also plays a central role in the film's emotional foundation. Although the romance between Selene and Michael develops during the story, the deeper symbolic relationship is between Lucian and Sonia. Their love challenged the rigid social order established by Viktor. Rather than accepting hatred between species, they chose compassion and understanding. Viktor's decision to execute his own daughter rather than accept peace demonstrates how authoritarian systems often fear love because it breaks down artificial barriers. Their relationship echoes famous tragic romances throughout literature and cinema. Like many classic stories of forbidden love, personal happiness becomes impossible because society refuses to accept differences between groups. Sonia and Lucian's tragedy becomes the emotional catalyst for everything that follows. The entire vampire-lichen war is revealed to be rooted not only in politics but also in fear of unity. The film also explores revenge and its destructive consequences. Nearly every major character is motivated by revenge in some form. Selene hunts lichens to avenge her murdered family. Lucian wages war because Viktor murdered Sonia. Viktor commits atrocities to preserve his authority after feeling betrayed. Even secondary characters act according to old grievances inherited across centuries. Revenge creates an endless cycle where every act of violence justifies another. One of the defining characteristics of Underworld is its unmistakable visual identity. Even among the many action and fantasy films released during the early 2000s, it immediately stood apart because of its cold color palette, Gothic architecture, carefully controlled lighting, and stylish cinematography. Long before audiences became invested in the mythology of vampires and lichens, they were immersed in a world that looked unlike almost anything else in mainstream cinema at the time. The visual style is not simply decorative, it reinforces the themes of secrecy, isolation, ancient history, and endless conflict that define the story. Every lighting choice, camera movement, costume, and location contributes to creating a believable hidden world existing alongside modern civilization. Director Len Wiseman and cinematographer Tony Pierce-Roberts approached the film with the goal of making the supernatural feel grounded rather than fantastical. Instead of relying on bright colors or exaggerated fantasy landscapes, they imagined a universe where vampires and lichens had adapted to contemporary cities while remaining hidden from humanity. This concept influenced every visual decision throughout the production. The result is a world that feels cold, dangerous, and permanently suspended between history and modernity. Perhaps the film's most recognizable visual element is its extensive use of blue. Nearly every scene is dominated by cool shades of blue, gray, black, and silver. Warm colors such as red, orange, and yellow appear only sparingly, usually during moments involving blood, explosions, or emotional intensity. This deliberate limitation creates emotional consistency across the entire movie. The blue tones suggest emotional distance, discipline, and the absence of ordinary human warmth. Since vampires are immortal creatures who have existed for centuries, their environment reflects a world that has become emotionally frozen. The cold palette also visually separates Underworld from traditional horror films, which often emphasize reds and deep shadows. Here, darkness is not associated with fire or hell but with moonlight, steel, rain, and stone. The visual atmosphere resembles winter even when snow is absent. This reinforces the idea that both vampires and lichens exist in a state of permanent conflict without comfort or peace. Lighting plays an equally important role. Most scenes are illuminated using low-key lighting, creating strong contrasts between light and shadow. Faces are frequently only partially visible, symbolizing the hidden motives and concealed histories carried by nearly every major character. Selene herself is often introduced emerging from darkness before stepping briefly into light, visually representing her gradual journey toward uncovering the truth. Shadows dominate the environments, allowing the filmmakers to create mystery without relying on excessive dialogue. Entire sections of buildings disappear into darkness, suggesting that the world extends beyond what the audience can see. This visual strategy strengthens the illusion that vampire society contains countless secrets buried beneath centuries of history. Rain is another recurring visual motif. Many exterior scenes take place during heavy rainfall or immediately afterward. Wet streets create reflective surfaces that multiply light sources and produce striking compositions filled with shimmering blue highlights. Beyond its aesthetic beauty, the constant rain symbolizes emotional cleansing, uncertainty, and the never-ending nature of the conflict. The weather itself appears trapped in an endless cycle, much like the war between vampires and lichens. The film's production design further enhances its distinctive appearance. Vampire society occupies grand mansions, Gothic cathedrals, ancient castles, and luxurious underground chambers. Massive stone walls, towering columns, ornate staircases, and elaborate windows remind audiences that vampire civilization has existed for centuries. These locations project wealth, stability, and tradition while simultaneously feeling emotionally sterile. Their beauty hides corruption beneath the surface. By contrast, The lichens inhabit abandoned factories, industrial warehouses, underground tunnels, saws, and neglected urban spaces. These locations emphasize movement, survival, and adaptation. The rough textures of rusted metal, exposed pipes, cracked concrete, and decaying machinery visually distinguish the lichens from the polished elegance of vampire society. Without explicitly stating it, the environments communicate the class divisions separating the two species. Camera movement throughout Underworld carefully balances elegance with intensity. During quieter scenes, the camera often moves slowly and deliberately, allowing viewers to absorb the architecture and atmosphere. Tracking shots guide audiences through corridors, staircases, and hidden chambers, reinforcing the feeling of exploring an ancient civilization concealed beneath modern life. These measured movements create suspense while maintaining visual sophistication. During action scenes, however, the camera becomes significantly more dynamic. Fast tracking shots, rapid pans, handheld movements, and energetic editing communicate the speed and violence of combat without becoming disorienting. Wiseman avoids excessive camera shaking, ensuring that audiences can clearly follow each fight. This clarity distinguishes Underworld from many later action films that relied heavily on chaotic editing. One of the movie's greatest visual strengths is its framing. Characters are frequently positioned within doorways, arches, windows, or narrow corridors, creating natural frames inside the image itself. These compositions emphasize themes of imprisonment, hierarchy, and surveillance. Selene often appears isolated within large architectural spaces, visually reinforcing her emotional loneliness despite belonging to an ancient society. Symmetry also appears frequently during scenes involving vampire leadership. Viktor is regularly framed in perfectly balanced compositions that emphasize order, discipline, and authority. As his moral corruption becomes increasingly apparent, these carefully controlled images gain ironic significance. The orderly visual presentation contrasts sharply with the chaos hidden beneath his leadership. One of the most important reasons Underworld succeeds in creating its dark and immersive atmosphere is its exceptional use of music and sound. While audiences often remember the film for its blue-tinted visuals and stylish action sequences, the audio design is equally responsible for shaping the emotional experience. Every gunshot, footstep, heartbeat, growl, and musical cue contributes to building a world that feels ancient, dangerous, and constantly on the edge of violence. The soundtrack does far more than accompany the action. It becomes another storyteller, guiding the audience through moments of suspense, tragedy, romance, and revelation. The musical score for Underworld was composed by Paul Haslinger, an Austrian musician and composer whose background was somewhat unusual for a Hollywood action film. Before becoming a film composer, Haslinger had been a member of the influential electronic music group Tangerine Dream. His experience with synthesizers, atmospheric soundscapes, and electronic composition gave him the perfect foundation for creating a score that blended traditional orchestral elements with modern industrial textures. Instead of writing heroic adventure music or classic horror themes, he crafted a sound that reflected the cold, mechanical, and emotionally restrained world inhabited by vampires and lichens. From the opening moments of the film, the music establishes an atmosphere of mystery rather than excitement. Low electronic drones, deep bass tones, distant percussion, and haunting strings immediately create the feeling that the audience is entering a hidden world existing beneath ordinary society. The score avoids excessive melody during these early scenes, choosing instead to build tension through subtle layers of sound. This restraint allows the audience to focus on the mood rather than simply noticing the music itself. One of the defining characteristics of the score is its balance between electronic and orchestral elements. The electronic components symbolize the modern setting of the story. Vampires use advanced technology, firearms, surveillance equipment, and sophisticated laboratories, so synthetic sounds naturally fit their world. At the same time, orchestral strings and choir-like textures remind viewers that these characters carry centuries of history. The combination creates a musical identity that feels both ancient and contemporary, perfectly matching the film's visual style. Rather than assigning overly obvious musical themes to individual characters, Haslinger uses mood and texture to represent emotional states. Selene's scenes are often accompanied by restrained, melancholic harmonies that reflect her loneliness and unwavering sense of duty. Her music rarely celebrates victory. Even during successful battles, there is usually an underlying sadness suggesting that centuries of warfare have left her emotionally isolated. This subtle approach reinforces the idea that Selene is not an action hero seeking glory but a soldier trapped within an endless conflict. Michael Corvin's musical treatment evolves throughout the film. In the beginning, the score surrounding him is relatively simple and uncertain, reflecting his ordinary life and lack of understanding. As he becomes increasingly entangled in the supernatural world, the music gradually becomes darker and more complex. By the time he undergoes his transformation, electronic rhythms, deeper orchestration, and more aggressive percussion accompany his scenes, signaling that his identity has permanently changed. Lucian's presence is often announced through heavier, more dramatic musical cues. However, the score avoids portraying him as a simple villain. Instead of relying on threatening horror music, Haslinger frequently incorporates emotional undertones that hint at Lucian's tragic past. Even before audiences fully understand his motivations, the music suggests that there is sorrow beneath his determination. This subtle emotional guidance prepares viewers for the later revelation that Lucian's rebellion is rooted in love and injustice rather than simple hatred. Viktor's scenes feature some of the score's most imposing material. Deep orchestral tones, sustained low brass, and restrained choral textures emphasize his immense authority. His music moves slowly and deliberately, reflecting centuries of accumulated power. Unlike Lucian's emotionally layered themes, Viktor's musical identity projects certainty and control. As the audience gradually learns the truth about his past, these same musical choices become increasingly ironic, since the apparent strength they represent hides corruption and deception. Silence is one of the film's most effective audio tools. Many action movies fill nearly every moment with music, but Underworld frequently allows scenes to unfold with little or no score. During investigations, conversations, or moments of uncertainty, the absence of music forces audiences to pay closer attention to environmental sounds and character performances. This restraint increases suspense because viewers instinctively expect something dangerous to emerge from the silence. The opening subway sequence demonstrates this technique particularly well. Instead of overwhelming the audience with loud music, the filmmakers emphasize footsteps, train sounds, echoes, distant conversations, and subtle environmental noise. These ordinary sounds create realism while allowing moments of sudden violence to feel even more shocking. When combat finally erupts, the contrast between quiet observation and explosive action becomes significantly more powerful. The sound effects throughout the film are exceptionally detailed. Firearms possess distinct audio identities, with each weapon producing unique mechanical sounds during firing, reloading, and handling. Since guns play such a central role in the movie, their sound design reinforces the professionalism of the death dealers. Every reload, magazine insertion, and trigger pull sounds precise and deliberate, emphasizing that these characters have mastered their weapons through centuries of combat experience. Silver bullets receive particular attention within the sound mix. Their impact carries a sharper, more metallic quality than ordinary ammunition, subtly reminding audiences of their supernatural importance. Combined with visual effects, these distinctive sounds reinforce the deadly nature of silver within the film's mythology. When Underworld was released in September 2003, it immediately generated strong reactions from both critics and audiences. The film occupied an unusual position within the movie industry. It combined elements of horror, action, science fiction, fantasy, and gothic romance into a single package, making it difficult to compare directly with other films released at the time. While professional critics were generally divided or negative in their initial assessments, moviegoers responded much more enthusiastically. This difference between critical opinion and audience appreciation became one of the defining aspects of Underworld's history and helped establish it as a cult favorite that eventually grew into a successful franchise. Before its release, expectations were relatively modest. Underworld did not have the enormous production budget of major fantasy blockbusters such as the Lord of the Rings trilogy or the Matrix sequels. Instead, it relied on its unique visual identity, its intriguing mythology, and the growing popularity of supernatural stories. The marketing emphasized stylish action, vampires, werewolves, and Kate Beckinsale's striking portrayal of Selene, attracting fans of both horror and action cinema. During its opening weekend, the film performed better than many industry analysts had expected. It attracted audiences looking for dark alternatives to traditional action movies and quickly demonstrated that there was considerable interest in mature supernatural storytelling. Strong ticket sales during its early theatrical run proved that positive audience interest could overcome mixed critical reviews. Financially, Underworld became a success. Produced on a budget that was relatively modest compared to many Hollywood action films of the period, it earned several times its production costs at the worldwide box office. This commercial performance immediately justified plans for additional entries in the series. More importantly, it showed studios that original supernatural franchises could compete successfully alongside established properties. Professional critics, however, were far less enthusiastic. One of the most common criticisms focused on the screenplay. Many reviewers argued that the mythology was overly complicated, especially for newcomers unfamiliar with the fictional universe. The story introduces vampire politics, lichen history, bloodlines, ancient betrayals, hidden wars, hybrid genetics, and multiple generations of immortal characters within a relatively short running time. Some critics felt that this amount of information occasionally slowed the pacing or made the narrative unnecessarily dense. Another frequent criticism concerned the film's serious tone. Underworld contains very little humor, choosing instead to maintain a consistently dark atmosphere from beginning to end. Some reviewers believed this lack of lighter moments made the movie emotionally distant. They argued that the relentless seriousness prevented audiences from forming stronger emotional connections with certain characters. Others, however, viewed this consistency as one of the film's greatest strengths, praising its willingness to remain faithful to its Gothic identity. Several critics also compared Underworld to other successful films released shortly before it, particularly The Matrix and Blade. Because Underworld featured black leather costumes, slow-motion action sequences, acrobatic gunplay, and blue-tinted cinematography, some reviewers suggested that it borrowed heavily from those earlier productions. While visual similarities certainly existed, many fans argued that Underworld ultimately established its own identity through its mythology, political intrigue, and unique interpretation of vampires and lichens. Despite criticism directed toward the screenplay, the film's visual presentation received far more consistent praise. Even reviewers who disliked the story frequently acknowledged the impressive cinematography, production design, costume work, and atmospheric lighting. The distinctive blue color palette became one of the movie's defining characteristics, with many critics recognizing that the filmmakers had created a memorable visual style despite working with a budget far smaller than many contemporary blockbusters. Kate Beckinsale's performance received particularly positive attention. Many critics praised her ability to portray Selene as calm, intelligent, and physically capable without relying on exaggerated emotional performances. Rather than presenting the character as invulnerable, Beckinsale balanced strength with vulnerability, allowing Selene's emotional journey to remain believable. Her disciplined performance became one of the film's most widely praised elements and helped establish her as one of the leading female action stars of the early 21st century. Michael Sheen's portrayal of Lucian also earned considerable respect. Critics appreciated that he avoided playing the character as a conventional monster or one-dimensional villain. Instead, Lucian emerged as a tragic revolutionary motivated by love, loss, and justice rather than simple hatred. As audiences gradually learned the truth behind his rebellion, many reviewers acknowledged that Sheen brought emotional complexity to a role that could easily have become stereotypical. Bill Nighy's performance as Viktor similarly attracted praise. His calm authority, measured dialogue, and commanding screen presence made Viktor one of the film's most memorable characters. Rather than shouting or displaying obvious cruelty, Nighy conveyed menace through restraint, allowing audiences to sense Viktor's immense power long before his true nature was fully revealed. Among horror fans, Underworld quickly developed a loyal following. Many viewers appreciated that the film treated its supernatural mythology seriously instead of relying on comedy or self-parody. Fans enjoyed exploring the fictional history, debating the strengths of vampires versus lichens, and discussing the moral ambiguity presented throughout the story. Internet forums during the early 2000s became filled with conversations analyzing hidden details, character motivations, and unanswered questions regarding the franchise's mythology. Home video played a major role in expanding the film's popularity. When Underworld was released in 2003, few could have predicted that it would become one of the longest-running supernatural action franchises of the 21st century. Although its initial critical reception was mixed, the film's commercial success and rapidly growing fan base ensured that its story would continue well beyond a single movie. More than 2 decades later, Underworld remains one of the defining examples of dark urban fantasy in modern cinema. Its influence can be seen in later films, television series, comic books, video games, and even the continued popularity of Gothic-inspired action heroines. The movie's greatest legacy is not simply the franchise it created, but the way it permanently changed the presentation of vampires and werewolves for a new generation of audiences. The most obvious part of Underworld's legacy is the franchise itself. The success of the original film led to multiple sequels that expanded the mythology introduced in the first story. Rather than treating the movie as a standalone adventure, the filmmakers developed an interconnected narrative spanning centuries of vampire and lichen history. Each new installment explored different periods, introduced new characters, and answered questions left unresolved by the original film. The continued production of sequels demonstrated that audiences remained invested in the world first introduced through Selene's story. Unlike many franchises that rely solely on repeating familiar ideas, Underworld gradually expanded its mythology by exploring the origins of the vampire coven, the evolution of lichen society, the creation of hybrids, and the complicated family history connecting the immortal bloodlines. This commitment to world-building became one of the series' defining strengths. Fans appreciated that the fictional universe continued growing instead of merely recreating the same conflict in each installment. Kate Beckinsale's portrayal of Selene became one of the franchise's most enduring achievements. She joined the ranks of iconic female action heroes whose influence extended well beyond a single film series. Before Underworld, female protagonists certainly existed within action cinema, but major franchises led by women remained relatively uncommon. Selene demonstrated that audiences would enthusiastically support a serious, intelligent, physically capable heroine without requiring a traditional male lead to dominate the narrative. Over time, Selene became one of the most recognizable vampire characters in modern popular culture. Her black leather costume, twin pistols, calm personality, and unwavering determination made her instantly identifiable even among viewers who had not watched every film in the series. Cosplayers, fan artists, and collectors frequently recreated her appearance at conventions and exhibitions around the world. The image of Selene standing confidently with flowing black coat and silver weapons became one of the defining visual symbols of early 21st century fantasy cinema. The movie also transformed how filmmakers approached vampire mythology. Before Underworld, modern audiences often associated vampires with Gothic castles, aristocratic elegance, and supernatural seduction. Underworld retained their sophistication while reimagining them as highly trained warriors operating within secret military organizations. These vampires used advanced weapons, surveillance systems, scientific laboratories, and tactical planning alongside their supernatural abilities. This modern interpretation influenced numerous later productions that presented vampires as organized societies rather than isolated monsters. The lichens underwent an equally significant reinvention. Traditional werewolf stories usually portrayed lycanthropy as a curse centered on individual transformation and loss of control. Underworld instead imagined an entire civilization of intelligent lichens capable of organized warfare, political leadership, scientific experimentation, and strategic planning. This reinterpretation encouraged later creators to portray werewolves as complete societies with cultures and histories rather than simply dangerous beasts transformed during full moons. Another important aspect of the film's legacy is its contribution to the popularity of urban fantasy. Although the genre existed before Underworld, the movie helped demonstrate that audiences enjoyed stories where supernatural civilizations secretly coexisted with modern human society. Hidden worlds operating beneath familiar cities became increasingly common in fantasy films, television shows, novels, and video games throughout the following years. Underworld's combination of ancient mythology and contemporary settings influenced countless creators exploring similar ideas. Visually, The movie established an aesthetic that remained influential long after its release. The cold blue color grading, Gothic architecture, rain-soaked city streets, leather costumes, and elegant action choreography created a style immediately recognizable to audiences. Many later supernatural productions adopted similar visual techniques when attempting to create mature, atmospheric fantasy worlds. While each developed its own identity, Underworld helped define the visual language associated with dark urban fantasy during the early 2000s. The film also left a lasting mark on action choreography. Instead of separating martial arts from firearms, the Death Dealers combined graceful movement with military precision. Their combat style blended acrobatics, tactical shooting, and elegant body control into a distinctive fighting method. This approach influenced later fantasy and science fiction productions seeking to merge supernatural abilities with modern weaponry. Video games reflected the film's influence as well. Although no major game directly copied Underworld's story, numerous action games released during the following decade featured similar combinations of Gothic environments, supernatural creatures, dual-wielding protagonists, and dark visual design. Players increasingly encountered worlds where vampires, werewolves, demons, and secret organizations fought hidden wars beneath ordinary cities. Underworld helped demonstrate that this combination appealed strongly to fans of both action and fantasy. One of the reasons Underworld has remained popular for more than 2 decades is that different generations of viewers have interpreted the film in different ways. While some audiences simply enjoyed its exciting action scenes, stylish visuals, and supernatural mythology, others discovered deeper emotional and philosophical themes hidden beneath its surface. Unlike many action films that are easily forgotten after the credits roll, Underworld encouraged viewers to think about loyalty, prejudice, identity, truth, and personal freedom. As the years passed, audiences continued to revisit the movie, often finding new meanings that they had overlooked during their first viewing. When the film was first released in 2003, many younger viewers were immediately attracted to its unique visual style. The dark blue color palette, Gothic architecture, black leather costumes, and atmospheric cinematography created a world unlike anything many had seen before. At a time when fantasy films often focused on medieval settings or bright magical adventures, Underworld offered something colder, more mature, and more mysterious. For many teenagers and young adults, it became their introduction to modern urban fantasy. The early 2000s were also a period when audiences were fascinated by stories involving hidden worlds existing alongside everyday life. Films about secret organizations, ancient conspiracies, and supernatural societies had become increasingly popular. Underworld perfectly captured this interest by suggesting that vampires and lichens had lived among humanity for centuries without being discovered. Many viewers enjoyed imagining that ordinary cities might contain hidden histories invisible to the average person. This idea gave the film a sense of realism despite its fantasy elements. For many audience members, Selene quickly became the emotional center of the story. Rather than presenting an invincible superhero, the film introduced a character who slowly realized that everything she believed about her own life was built upon deception. Viewers often identified with this journey because nearly everyone experiences moments when long-held beliefs are challenged by new information. Selene's willingness to question authority despite enormous personal risk resonated strongly with audiences who valued independent thinking and personal integrity. Many fans interpreted Selene's story as a metaphor for growing up. At the beginning of the film, she accepts the world exactly as it has been explained to her. Like many people during childhood, she trusts authority figures completely. As new evidence emerges, however, she begins questioning those assumptions and eventually forms her own conclusions. This transition from unquestioning obedience to independent judgment mirrors experiences many people encounter as they mature and develop their own understanding of the world. Michael's journey also resonated with audiences, particularly younger viewers. His transformation from an ordinary medical student into someone caught between multiple identities reflected feelings of uncertainty that many people experience during periods of personal change. Michael never chooses to become involved in the ancient conflict, yet he must adapt to circumstances beyond his control. His struggle to understand who he has become symbolizes the challenges of discovering one's identity in an increasingly complicated world. One of the most common audience interpretations concerns the idea of prejudice. Many viewers saw the conflict between vampires and lycans as representing real-world divisions based on race, nationality, religion, class, or culture. Both species spend centuries believing stereotypes about one another without questioning whether those beliefs are true. Hatred becomes inherited rather than earned. As audiences gradually learn the truth alongside Selene, many recognized parallels with historical conflicts where generations continue fighting because of stories passed down rather than personal experience. This interpretation became increasingly meaningful for viewers living in multicultural societies. Underworld suggests that fear often survives because people refuse to communicate with those they consider enemies. The relationship between vampires and lycans demonstrates how misunderstanding can become institutionalized until entire civilizations forget why the conflict originally began. Many audience members viewed this message as one of the film's most powerful and enduring themes. The romance between Selene and Michael generated varied responses among viewers. Some interpreted it primarily as a traditional love story developing under dangerous circumstances. Others viewed it symbolically as the possibility of reconciliation between opposing groups. Michael's eventual transformation into a hybrid reinforced this interpretation. Instead of representing division, he became living proof that seemingly incompatible identities could coexist within a single individual. Lucian emerged as another character whose audience reception changed dramatically throughout the film. Initially, many viewers accepted the vampire's description of him as a dangerous terrorist responsible for endless violence. As his history gradually unfolded, however, audiences often found themselves sympathizing with his motivations. The revelation that Lucian's rebellion began after Viktor murdered Sonia completely transformed how many people viewed the conflict. This narrative reversal encouraged viewers to reconsider their own assumptions and reminded them that every conflict contains multiple perspectives. Fans frequently discussed Viktor as one of the film's most interesting characters. Rather than portraying him as obviously evil from the beginning, the story presents him as a respected leader whose true nature remains hidden until later in the film. Many audience members interpreted Viktor as representing authoritarian power, illustrating how leaders sometimes rewrite history to maintain control. His calm confidence and apparent wisdom make his eventual exposure even more disturbing because viewers realize how easily authority can disguise corruption. For many fans, one of the movie's greatest strengths lies in its moral ambiguity. Unlike traditional fantasy stories that clearly separate heroes from villains, Underworld presents nearly every major character as morally complicated. One of the greatest strengths of Underworld is that its characters are far more complex than they initially appear. At first glance, the film seems to present a familiar conflict between heroic vampires and villainous lycans. However, as the story unfolds, every major character undergoes some form of transformation, whether emotional, psychological, or physical. Their personal journeys become the driving force behind the narrative, gradually revealing that the ancient war is not simply a battle between good and evil, but a conflict shaped by fear, betrayal, love, and the burden of history. Each character represents a different response to power, loyalty, loss, and truth, making their development essential to the emotional impact of the film. The central character, Selene, experiences the most significant transformation. At the beginning of the film, she is completely devoted to the vampire coven and serves as one of its most respected death dealers. Her entire identity is built upon discipline, obedience, and the belief that lycans are ruthless monsters responsible for centuries of suffering. She has spent her immortal life hunting them without questioning the justice of her mission. Selene believes she understands the world perfectly, and this certainty gives her purpose. However, beneath her confidence lies emotional isolation. She rarely forms close relationships, keeps her feelings hidden, and dedicates herself entirely to duty. The murder of her human family centuries earlier continues to shape every decision she makes. Although she rarely speaks about her grief, it remains the emotional foundation of her character. Revenge has become so deeply connected to her identity that she cannot imagine a life beyond the endless war. The first stage of Selene's development begins when she notices the lycans pursuing Michael Corvin. Rather than dismissing the incident, she follows her instincts and investigates further. This decision represents the first crack in her unquestioning loyalty. Instead of accepting the explanations provided by her superiors, she allows curiosity to guide her actions. It is a small act of independence, but it sets in motion everything that follows. As Selene spends more time protecting Michael, another side of her personality gradually emerges. She becomes more compassionate, patient, and emotionally open. Michael treats her not as a legendary warrior but simply as another person trying to survive impossible circumstances. Their growing relationship reminds Selene that she is capable of trusting someone outside the rigid structure of vampire society. This emotional awakening becomes just as important as her discovery of hidden historical truths. The most dramatic turning point in Selene's arc occurs when she learns that Viktor, the man she respected as both leader and father figure, has manipulated her for centuries. Discovering that he not only lied about Lucian but also ordered the murder of her own family completely destroys the foundation upon which she built her identity. Instead of allowing this revelation to break her, Selene chooses to confront reality. She accepts the painful truth even though it forces her to abandon everything she previously believed. By the end of the film, Selene has transformed from a loyal soldier into an independent individual capable of making her own moral decisions. She no longer fights because tradition demands it. Instead, she chooses her own path based on justice rather than inherited prejudice. Her journey represents the courage required to question authority and redefine oneself after discovering uncomfortable truths. Michael Corvin undergoes an equally important transformation, although his arc differs significantly from Selene's. At the beginning of the story, Michael is an ordinary medical student living a completely normal human life. He has no knowledge of vampires, lichens, or the ancient conflicts surrounding him. His greatest strength is his humanity. Unlike the immortal characters, he approaches situations with curiosity rather than prejudice, making him uniquely capable of adapting to rapidly changing circumstances. Initially, Michael functions as the audience's perspective. Because he knows nothing about the hidden supernatural world, viewers learn alongside him. His confusion, fear, and disbelief mirror what most people would experience if suddenly confronted with immortal creatures. This relatability allows audiences to become emotionally invested in his survival. Michael's physical transformation begins after Lucian bites him. However, his emotional transformation had already started much earlier. Forced to abandon his ordinary life, he demonstrates remarkable resilience and courage despite facing situations no human could reasonably understand. Instead of surrendering to panic, he continues trying to protect others and understand the truth. The creation of the hybrid represents both Michael's greatest challenge and his greatest achievement. He becomes something entirely new, belonging fully to neither humans, vampires, nor lichens. This loss of identity could easily have destroyed him emotionally. Instead, Michael embraces his new existence with determination rather than resentment. His transformation symbolizes the possibility of overcoming divisions that previous generations considered impossible. Lucian possesses one of the film's most tragic character arcs. At first, audiences are encouraged to see him as the primary antagonist. Vampire history portrays him as a savage revolutionary responsible for countless deaths and endless violence. However, as more information becomes available, viewers gradually discover that Lucian is actually motivated by grief, love, and justice rather than cruelty. One of the most memorable aspects of Underworld is its extraordinary costume and set design. Long after audiences have forgotten individual action scenes or pieces of dialogue, many still remember the film's distinctive visual world. The elegant black leather clothing, Gothic mansions, underground chambers, industrial hideouts, ancient weapons, and rain-soaked streets created an instantly recognizable identity that became one of the defining characteristics of the franchise. Rather than serving as simple decoration, the costumes and environments function as visual storytelling tools, revealing personality, social status, history, ideology, and emotional tone without requiring extensive dialogue. From the beginning of the film, the audience immediately understands that the vampire and lichen societies are fundamentally different because of the way they dress and the places they inhabit. Every design choice reinforces these contrasts, making the world believable despite its supernatural premise. The most iconic costume in the film is undoubtedly Selene's black leather outfit. It has become one of the most recognizable costumes in modern fantasy and action cinema. The design combines elegance with practicality, allowing Selene to appear both sophisticated and battle-ready. Unlike many action heroines of earlier decades, her clothing is not designed simply to attract attention. Instead, every element reflects her role as an elite warrior who has spent centuries mastering combat. The fitted leather suit provides freedom of movement while emphasizing discipline and professionalism. The long coat flowing behind her during action scenes creates a dramatic silhouette that makes her instantly recognizable even from a distance. As she runs across rooftops or moves through dark corridors, the coat almost appears like the wings of a predator, reinforcing her identity as a deadly hunter. The black color of Selene's costume carries strong symbolic meaning. Black represents mystery, secrecy, authority, and emotional restraint. It also allows her to blend naturally into the dark environments where much of the film takes place. Since death dealers operate almost entirely at night, their clothing reflects their role as silent predators hidden within the shadows. Silver accessories provide an important visual contrast. Her pistols, ammunition, buckles, and weapons stand out sharply against the black leather, immediately drawing attention to the tools she uses to hunt lichens. Silver also carries symbolic significance within the mythology, representing one of the few materials capable of killing supernatural creatures. The combination of black and silver became one of the franchise's defining visual trademarks. Kate Beckinsale has spoken in interviews over the years about the physical challenges of wearing Selene's costume. The leather was extremely tight, heavy, and often uncomfortable during long filming days under powerful studio lighting. Action scenes required careful choreography because the outfit restricted movement more than ordinary clothing. Despite these practical difficulties, the costume became one of the film's greatest visual achievements and remains closely associated with Beckinsale's career. The costumes worn by other vampires reflect the rigid hierarchy of their society. Viktor, for example, dresses in elegant, aristocratic clothing inspired by centuries of European nobility. Long coats, formal collars, carefully tailored fabrics, and restrained ornamentation emphasize his status as an ancient ruler. His wardrobe communicates power without requiring excessive decoration. Unlike fantasy villains who often wear elaborate armor, Viktor's authority comes through simplicity and confidence. Kraven's costumes differ subtly from Viktor's despite belonging to the same society. His clothing appears fashionable and luxurious, but also slightly more decorative and self-conscious. These details reflect Kraven's personality. He is deeply concerned with appearances and social status, using clothing to project authority that he has not truly earned. His elegant wardrobe masks insecurity rather than genuine confidence. Erika's costumes further illustrate vampire culture's emphasis on sophistication. Her clothing balances elegance with modern fashion, suggesting someone who enjoys privilege and luxury within vampire society. Rather than appearing as medieval aristocrats frozen in time, the vampires combine historical influences with contemporary style, reinforcing the idea that they have adapted successfully to the modern world while preserving ancient traditions. The lichens present a complete visual contrast. Their clothing is practical, worn, and functional rather than elegant. Leather jackets, heavy boots, military-style trousers, hooded coats, and industrial workwear dominate their appearance. Their costumes communicate constant movement, survival, and readiness for conflict. Unlike the vampires, who dress to reflect social hierarchy, the lichens dress according to necessity. Lucian's wardrobe deserves particular attention. Although he shares many characteristics with other lichens, his clothing contains subtle elements of leadership. Long coats, darker colors, and carefully selected textures distinguish him from ordinary soldiers while avoiding excessive luxury. His appearance reflects someone who leads through respect rather than inherited status. Even without dialogue, audiences immediately recognize Lucian as someone important. The transformation makeup created for the lichens represents another remarkable achievement. Rather than depicting werewolves as entirely separate creatures, the makeup artists designed transitional forms that retained recognizable human features. This decision reinforced the idea that lichens remain intelligent individuals despite their monstrous appearance. One of the defining characteristics of Underworld is its distinctive approach to dialogue and screenplay structure. Unlike many action films that rely heavily on humor, fast-paced one-liners, or lengthy speeches, Underworld embraces restraint. The script is deliberately serious, often allowing silence, atmosphere, and visual storytelling to communicate as much as the spoken words. Conversations are carefully measured, reflecting the personalities of immortal characters who have lived for centuries and who rarely speak without purpose. This writing style contributes significantly to the film's unique identity, creating a world where every conversation feels weighted by history, loyalty, and hidden secrets. The screenplay, written by Danny McBride from a story developed with Kevin Grevix and Len Wiseman, had the difficult task of introducing an entirely original mythology while maintaining the pacing of an action thriller. Rather than adapting an existing novel or comic book, the writers created a completely new universe with its own history, political structures, bloodlines, and social hierarchy. As a result, much of the dialogue serves two purposes at once: advancing the story while gradually revealing the rules governing this hidden supernatural world. One of the screenplay's greatest strengths is its confidence in the audience. Instead of explaining every detail immediately, the script introduces concepts gradually, allowing viewers to piece together the mythology through observation and conversation. Terms such as death dealers, elders, lichens, bloodlines, and hybrids are presented naturally, encouraging the audience to learn the fictional universe in the same way Michael Corvin does. This technique creates a sense of discovery rather than overwhelming viewers with long explanations. Selene's dialogue perfectly reflects her personality. She speaks very little throughout the film compared to many action protagonists. Her sentences are concise, direct, and emotionally controlled. She rarely wastes words because centuries of military discipline have taught her efficiency in both speech and action. This restraint makes every important statement carry greater emotional weight. When Selene finally expresses anger, doubt, or affection, those moments feel significant precisely because she normally keeps her emotions hidden. Kate Beckinsale delivers these lines with remarkable subtlety. Rather than relying on dramatic speeches, she often communicates more through tone of voice than through the words themselves. Small pauses, slight changes in emphasis, and restrained emotional delivery reinforce Selene's calm exterior while hinting at the emotional conflict developing beneath the surface. This understated performance allows the audience to sense her gradual transformation long before she openly questions vampire authority. Michael Corvin's dialogue provides an important contrast. As the only major human character for much of the story, his conversations are filled with confusion, disbelief, and curiosity. Unlike the immortal characters, Michael asks questions that the audience naturally wants answered. His uncertainty prevents the exposition from feeling artificial because his lack of knowledge mirrors that of first-time viewers. Instead of delivering lengthy explanations to the audience directly, the screenplay allows Michael's curiosity to guide the flow of information. As Michael becomes increasingly involved in the supernatural conflict, his dialogue gradually changes. Early conversations emphasize disbelief and fear. Later exchanges reveal growing confidence and determination as he begins accepting his new reality. This subtle shift in speech patterns reflects his personal development without requiring dramatic declarations or obvious character speeches. Lucian's dialogue is among the screenplay's most sophisticated achievements. Initially presented as the film's apparent villain, his conversations are carefully written to contain hidden emotional depth. Even before audiences learn the truth about his past, Lucian rarely speaks with unnecessary cruelty or hatred. Instead, his words reveal intelligence, patience, and quiet determination. He does not seek destruction for its own sake but pursues a specific objective rooted in centuries of injustice. Michael Sheen delivers Lucian's lines with emotional complexity, allowing viewers to sense that the character possesses motivations extending beyond simple revenge. Once the truth about Sonia is revealed, many earlier conversations take on entirely new meaning. The screenplay rewards attentive audiences by allowing previous dialogue to be reinterpreted through newly discovered information. Viktor's dialogue reflects centuries of unquestioned authority. Every sentence he speaks carries absolute confidence. He never hesitates or appears uncertain because he has spent generations ruling vampire society. His language is formal, measured, and commanding. Bill Nighy's calm delivery enhances the screenplay by making Viktor's authority seem effortless. He rarely raises his voice because he has never needed to. His confidence comes from believing that his position is beyond challenge. One of the screenplay's most effective techniques is allowing Viktor to sound reasonable even while concealing terrible truths. Many of his statements appear wise when first heard, only revealing their manipulative nature after later revelations expose his deception. This layered writing makes Viktor a more compelling antagonist because his authority initially seems entirely justified. Craven's dialogue illustrates insecurity hidden beneath arrogance. Unlike Viktor's calm confidence, Craven frequently exaggerates his authority through boastful statements and exaggerated confidence. His conversations reveal someone constantly trying to convince others of his importance. As events spiral beyond his control, his dialogue becomes increasingly defensive and desperate, reflecting the collapse of his carefully constructed public image. The screenplay also makes effective use of silence. Many of the film's most memorable moments contain little or no dialogue. Characters frequently observe one another, exchange meaningful glances, or simply remain silent while processing important revelations. These pauses allow audiences to absorb emotional developments without constant verbal explanation. In many scenes, silence becomes as expressive as conversation itself. Marketing played an essential role in the success of Underworld. Although the film did not have the enormous promotional budget enjoyed by many major Hollywood blockbusters of the early 2000s, its campaign was remarkably effective in creating curiosity and excitement. Rather than attempting to appeal to every type of moviegoer, the marketing focused on a very specific audience: fans of action, horror, fantasy, gothic culture, and supernatural mythology. This focused strategy allowed Underworld to build a strong identity before its release, helping it stand out in a crowded marketplace and eventually become one of the most recognizable supernatural franchises of its era. One of the marketing team's greatest achievements was creating a visual identity that audiences could recognize instantly. Nearly every promotional image shared the same cold blue color palette that dominated the film itself. Instead of using bright colors or dramatic explosions, advertisements emphasized darkness, rain, shadows, and elegant gothic imagery. This consistency meant that viewers immediately associated the blue and black aesthetic with Underworld long before they had actually seen the movie. Kate Beckinsale became the centerpiece of the promotional campaign. Posters, magazine advertisements, and theater displays frequently featured Selene standing confidently with her twin pistols, wearing her now iconic black leather outfit. These images communicated several ideas simultaneously. They established that the film centered on a powerful female protagonist, highlighted the gothic atmosphere, and promised stylish action rather than traditional horror. The decision to place Selene at the center of nearly every major promotional image proved extremely successful because she quickly became the face of the franchise. The theatrical poster remains one of the most memorable fantasy posters of the early 21st century. Selene stands against a cold blue background, surrounded by darkness and rain, her expression calm and determined. Her posture suggests confidence rather than fear, immediately communicating that she is not simply a victim within the story but its primary warrior. The minimalist design avoided excessive visual clutter, allowing audiences to focus entirely on the mysterious central character. Another important aspect of the marketing campaign was its emphasis on mystery. Early trailers revealed surprisingly little about the complete storyline. Rather than explaining the entire mythology, the promotional material introduced the existence of vampires and lichens while hinting at an ancient hidden war beneath modern society. Viewers learned just enough to become intrigued without having major plot twists revealed in advance. The theatrical trailers effectively balanced action and atmosphere. Fast-paced editing showcased gunfights, martial arts, werewolf transformations, explosions, and dramatic confrontations while avoiding excessive spoilers. Between these action sequences, quieter moments introduced Selene, Michael, Viktor, and Lucian, allowing audiences to recognize the major characters without fully understanding their relationships. This approach encouraged curiosity while preserving many of the film's most significant surprises. Music also played an important role within the trailers. Instead of using traditional orchestral adventure themes, the marketing featured darker industrial sounds, electronic rhythms, and dramatic percussion that reflected the film's modern Gothic identity. This musical choice immediately distinguished Underworld from more conventional fantasy films and appealed to audiences interested in darker, more mature storytelling. Television commercials followed a similar strategy but condensed the experience into shorter formats. These advertisements focused heavily on the visual spectacle, emphasizing rapid action sequences, supernatural creatures, and Selene's impressive combat abilities. Because television spots lasted only a few seconds, they relied on striking imagery rather than detailed storytelling. The repeated appearance of blue lighting, leather costumes, and silver weapons created strong visual recognition among viewers. Print advertising extended the campaign through entertainment magazines, comic book publications, horror magazines, and genre-specific media. Full-page advertisements often featured dramatic close-ups of Selene alongside brief taglines emphasizing the ancient conflict between vampires and lichens. Rather than presenting lengthy plot summaries, these advertisements relied on striking visuals to capture attention. The marketing team wisely targeted communities already interested in fantasy and horror. Comic book readers, science fiction enthusiasts, gothic subcultures, and action movie fans became primary audiences for promotional efforts. This focused strategy helped generate strong word of mouth before the film's release because the people most likely to appreciate Underworld became its earliest supporters. At the time of the film's release, internet marketing was becoming increasingly important within the entertainment industry. Although social media had not yet become the dominant promotional tool it is today, official websites played a major role in generating excitement. The Underworld website featured character biographies, downloadable wallpapers, production information, trailers, photographs, and background material explaining portions of the film's mythology. Fans could explore the fictional universe before entering the theater, strengthening their emotional investment. Online discussion forums also contributed significantly to the movie's promotion. Horror websites, fantasy communities, and movie discussion boards debated the upcoming release for months before audiences actually saw the film. Conversations comparing vampires and werewolves, speculation about the hidden mythology, and anticipation surrounding Kate Beckinsale's action role generated valuable free publicity through enthusiastic fan engagement. One particularly effective marketing decision involved emphasizing the conflict itself rather than simply promoting vampires. The phrase vampires versus lichens immediately created curiosity because it suggested a large-scale supernatural war rather than a traditional vampire story. This distinction separated Underworld from earlier gothic horror films and positioned it as something new within the fantasy genre. One of the best ways to appreciate Underworld is to compare it with the films that came before it, the movies released alongside it, and the productions it later influenced. While Underworld clearly draws inspiration from earlier vampire and action films, it also introduced enough original ideas to establish its own identity. Instead of copying a single formula, the film combines elements from horror, science fiction, action, gothic romance, and political drama into a unique cinematic experience. Its lasting popularity comes largely from this ability to blend familiar concepts into something that feels fresh and distinctive. The comparison most frequently made is between Underworld and Blade. Released in 1998, Blade helped revive interest in vampire action films by presenting vampires as members of a hidden modern society rather than traditional gothic monsters. Both films feature stylish action sequences, leather costumes, firearms loaded with specialized ammunition, martial arts, and dark urban environments. In both stories, vampires operate secretly within contemporary cities while humans remain unaware of their existence. Despite these similarities, the two films approach their subject matter very differently. Blade focuses primarily on a single hero hunting vampires. The conflict is relatively straightforward, with clear heroes and villains. Underworld, however, places its emphasis on an ancient civil war between two supernatural civilizations. Rather than presenting one side as unquestionably good, it gradually reveals that both vampires and lichens possess heroes, villains, victims, and leaders driven by complicated motivations. This moral ambiguity gives Underworld a more political and emotionally layered narrative. The visual styles also differ. Blade uses warmer colors, stronger contrasts, and more aggressive editing to create an energetic comic book atmosphere. Underworld adopts a colder blue color palette, slower pacing, and more restrained cinematography. The result is a mood that feels melancholic rather than explosive. While Blade celebrates action, Underworld often emphasizes tragedy. Another inevitable comparison is with The Matrix, released in 1999. Underworld clearly reflects some of the visual trends popularized by that groundbreaking science fiction film. Black leather clothing, slow-motion action, acrobatic gunfights, and highly choreographed combat sequences all invite comparison. However, beneath these visual similarities lie very different storytelling priorities. The Matrix explores philosophical questions surrounding artificial reality, free will, and humanity's relationship with technology. Underworld instead focuses on history, identity, inherited prejudice, and political corruption. The action in The Matrix often serves abstract philosophical ideas, while the action in Underworld is deeply connected to centuries of personal loss and emotional conflict. Although both films feature stylish combat, the emotional foundations behind those battles differ significantly. Some critics initially argued that Underworld borrowed too heavily from The Matrix's aesthetic. Over time, however, audiences increasingly recognized that the blue lighting, leather costumes, and action choreography eventually became part of Underworld's own distinctive identity rather than simple imitation. Another interesting comparison can be made with Interview with the Vampire. Released in 1994, that film presents vampires as deeply emotional, introspective beings struggling with immortality, loneliness, and morality. Conversations dominate much of its narrative, while action remains relatively limited. Underworld moves in the opposite direction, emphasizing combat and political intrigue while maintaining emotional depth beneath the surface. Both films portray vampire society as ancient, hierarchical, and governed by traditions. However, Interview with the Vampire focuses almost entirely on personal relationships and internal emotional conflict. Underworld expands the concept into organized civilizations complete with military forces, scientific research, and centuries of warfare. The two films demonstrate how flexible vampire mythology can be when interpreted through different genres. Bram Stoker's Dracula also provides an important point of comparison. Francis Ford Coppola's adaptation embraces classic Gothic horror, elaborate historical settings, romantic tragedy, and supernatural mystery. Underworld respects many traditional vampire elements while relocating them into a modern urban environment. Castles become underground mansions. Swords are replaced by automatic weapons. Horse-drawn carriages give way to speeding vehicles. Yet both films share an interest in immortality, forbidden love, and the emotional consequences of living for centuries. Perhaps the greatest difference is tone. Dracula presents vampires as mysterious supernatural aristocrats connected to ancient folklore. Underworld transforms them into disciplined warriors operating within organized military structures. The mythology evolves without abandoning its roots. The werewolf mythology also deserves comparison with earlier films such as An American Werewolf in London and The Howling. Those classic movies focus primarily on the horror of transformation and the personal tragedy of becoming a monster. Their werewolves are usually isolated individuals cursed by circumstances beyond their control. Underworld completely reimagines this concept. Lycans are not lonely victims but members of a fully developed civilization. They possess leadership, strategy, laboratories, families, and political goals. Rather than emphasizing fear of transformation itself, the film explores oppression, rebellion, and social injustice. This reinterpretation significantly expanded the possibilities of werewolf storytelling.